Hi, everybody. It's Peter Schiff. It is Monday, January 25th, 2010. Well, we had a lot of volatility in the markets late last week. I know Friday, I think the Dow was off better than 200 points. I think we saw that decline. But there were certainly a lot of rumors swirling about on Friday that had the markets nervous. One of the rumors was that Bernanke might not be reappointed as Fed chairman. And, I have very mixed feelings about Bernanke's reappointment because even though he's done a terrible job, no question about it, he's done an awful job as Fed chairman, that even if we don't reappoint him, chances are that Congress and the president will find somebody who would do even a worse job. So in this case, it's the devil that we know. But when you hear all the praise and the criticism about Bernanke, most of it is wrong. I was listening yesterday. One of these guys on CNBC, Kramer, was talking about how Bernanke helped prove that laissez-faire didn't work, that he discredited laissez-faire, and that we need more government. And he said that it was because of the laissez-faire approach that we had this financial crisis. And again, that's how laissez-faire got a bad rap, because laissez-faire didn't create the crisis. Laissez-faire would have prevented the crisis. It was because the government was so involved in the credit markets and in the mortgage markets that market forces were not allowed to work. And as a result, we had these problems. I constantly hear this stuff from the CNBC anchors that annoys me. I mean, today, Joe Kernan I saw on, who has interviewed me many times over the years on CNBC, when he was talking about this subject, and there was somebody on there that was opposed to Bernanke's reappointment on the grounds that, well, yes, he helped put out the fire, but he lit the fire, which is, of course, what I've said. The Kernan defended Bernanke by saying that, well, nobody could have seen this coming. Nobody could have predicted this big decline in housing prices, so we can't blame Bernanke for not seeing something that no one else saw. And every time I hear that, I get upset because he knows that plenty of people saw it coming. He knows that I saw it coming. I spoke about it on his program on CNBC. It was his show, after all, that started calling me Dr. Doom. I mean, there are plenty of people out there who saw the financial crisis coming. The fact that Bernanke was blind to it just shows how little he knows about economics. And the fact that he was a party to it and the fact that he helped cause it is reason enough not to reappoint him. But either way, the markets were very nervous about it. Now we've gotten confirmation, it seems, from the Senate not to worry, that he's got the support and he's going to be reconfirmed. I guess that's good news and we can all celebrate that. Also, there were rumors that there were problems with Geithner, that maybe he was going to be ousted. Also, we heard some story on Friday regarding Freddie and Fannie, that now that they were going to be abolished as we know it, which I think is a great idea. We need to get rid of Freddie and Fannie. The problem is, I'm sure that the government is getting ready to take over their functions completely, as if they haven't already done that already. The reality is that the government needs to get out of the mortgage subsidizing business completely. It doesn't make any sense for the government to be involved in guaranteeing mortgages. If people want to buy houses, they should have to do it based on their ability to afford the house without any help from the government. Either they have the cash to buy the house outright, or if they need a mortgage, they have to convince a banker to lend them the money based on their own creditworthiness, based on their own collateral, their own down payment, and their own income and their own ability to pay it back, not based on some government guarantee. That's what helped distort the market in the first place. I mean, after all, if somebody wants to rent a house, the government doesn't guarantee the landlord that the tenant's going to pay his rent. You have to rent an apartment or a house based on your own credit quality. Well, why isn't that true if you want to buy a house? And why should people who are renting houses be taxed to subsidize people who are buying them? Apart from it being illegal and unconstitutional, it's just not fair. And of course, it helps distort the economy. Also, today I was listening to some of the rumors about what President Obama is going to be discussing on Wednesday when he delivers the State of the Union address. And I'm sure I will try to record one of these blogs shortly thereafter to deliver the truth, because obviously the State of the Union is very precarious and very unsound, and I'm sure the president is going to have a much more upbeat message for the country. But I know that one of the things that he's going to be talking about is tax cuts for the middle class and the poor, as if that's actually going to help them get jobs. It's not. Sure, some of these plans to give bigger tax credits to people who have kids or people who are taking care of sick family members, sure, this will put a little more money in the pockets of the people who are getting the benefit. But where's the money going to come from? The government's going to have to go deeper into debt to get it, or they're going to have to create inflation. But if they're going deeper into debt, they're simply taking more money out of the private sector. They're taking more money away from the entrepreneurs who might otherwise have hired these people. So because the government's running bigger deficits and they're going to crowd out more small businesses, they're going to destroy employment opportunities, both those that exist, and they're going to prevent new employment opportunities from being created. So the more money the government transfers to the middle class, the worse shape they're going to be in, and the more government money they're going to claim to need, because the government, through transferring all this money out of the private sector, has destroyed their jobs or their prospects for getting jobs. And, I know one of the parts of the plan that I've heard of is that the president wants to make it easier for students who have student loans. Now, everybody knows who's been watching my blogs, I explained in detail why it's student loans, government guaranteed student loans, that are the main reasons that universities charge so much money in the first place. So the reason that kids need to borrow all this money is because the government guarantees the loans and everybody's able to bid up tuitions. Now what the government wants to do is going to make tuition prices rise even faster. Because what they want to do is they want to say that if you borrowed a lot of money to go to college, you don't actually have to pay it all back. The government wants to cap how much you have to pay. And what I'm reading is they want to make it so that your annual payments will not exceed 10% of your annual income. So, for example, if somebody graduates from college and they get a job and they're earning $30,000 a year, the most they'd have to pay in student loans is $3,000 per year. Even if the loans require a payment of $6,000 a year, they'd only have to pay $3,000 a year. And after they continue to make those payments for 10 years, that they would now be square. They wouldn't owe any more money. Even if they've only paid, let's say, 40% of what they borrowed, they'd be off the hook for the rest of the money. Now, this is going to do two things. Number one, it's going to reduce the incentives for college students to minimize the amount of money they borrow. After all, they're not going to have to pay it all back. In fact, if they borrow $100,000 to go to school, chances are that their payments are not going to be any higher than if they only borrow $50,000 based on what the caps are. So if there isn't this disincentive against borrowing a lot of money, students will be willing to borrow more money. And of course, the universities will know this, and they'll be able to cram bigger tuition hikes down the throats of the students. After all, they'll be able to tell the students, what do you care how much money we charge you? You can borrow all this extra money. You're not even going to have to pay it back. So what difference does it make? And number two, I think the incentives that we give the students, once we tell the students that they're not going to have to pay back all the money that they borrow while they're in school, is they have incentives to not only borrow more money to pay tuitions, but to borrow more money to finance their lifestyle while they're in college. Why share an apartment with four people? I'll rent my own apartment. Why drive an old car? Let me buy a new one. Why deny myself new clothes? Let me buy new clothes, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take on even more debt while I'm in school. Not necessarily for tuition, but just so I can have more fun, so I can buy more stuff. Because after all, the government has already said, I don't have to pay back all this money. I'm only going to have to pay back a fraction of the money that I borrow, so why not borrow it? This is the unintended consequence of what the government does. And the government has to understand that. So when the government says, well, don't worry, this student loan program is only going to cost us $1 billion, that's because they haven't factored in the effects of the program. Once students and universities know that only a fraction of what the money they borrow has to be repaid, a lot more money is going to be borrowed, tuitions are going to be even higher, and it's going to cost the government a lot more money than they think. And of course, the bigger deficits necessary to fund more loans to students are going to mean that the students who graduate are going to have diminished employment opportunities, because their prospective employers are not going to have the jobs because the credit and the capital has been siphoned off in order to pay for the programs. Take care, everybody. I'll be back again soon.